Good morning, everyone. Kevin here from Skywatcher, and welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. It is Friday, March 8th. We are 1 month away from the April 8th total solar eclipse that's going to be going across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And that is what the whole month of March is about. Last week, of course, we did our What's Up for the month, but this week and the rest of the month of March is all going to be about solar. So we're going to be starting that off today by choosing OTAs for eclipses. And really what today's going to be about is going into the specifications of what you should look for in an optic, and then what you can apply to that. But before we get started, if you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a like on the videos. It lets us know we're doing a good job. If you have an idea for a future episode, email us at info@skywatcherusa.com and title it What's Up. So yeah, as you can see, the studio's coming together. Look at that. We have another fish tank. Now you can all stop giving me a hard time that the fish tank disappeared. So there's a little one right there. If you want to know what model that is a Water Box Cube 20. So there you go. Fish tank is back. There's nothing in it. It's just rocks and sand and water. It's going to take some time to get fish ready to go in there. But yeah, there's a tank now. You're welcome. So, today we are talking about, solar and how to get ready for the eclipse. Before I get too far into it, make sure that you know exactly what you're doing when observing the sun. Please be safe at all times. If you are observing the sun, use all the appropriate filters beforehand. We do have episodes covering solar safety. Maybe we can put the link in the chat to the how to be safe with solar filters. So you can watch that video if you're not really sure what we're talking about, but you should always use solar filters during any solar observations. Unless you're going to be in totality, and only during totality is when you are able to go out and take that filter off. Only during totality in the path of totality. So please make sure you know what you're doing and you know what you're talking about. And I'm hoping the next few weeks as we warm up to April 8th will be helpful for you knowing more about the safety protocols when observing the sun. But if you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a like on a video. If you want to support the channel a little bit more, you can head over to skywatcher.threadless.com. You can pick up some cool swag up there. We're always adding some new stuff. All that goes to supporting the channel and helping things move forward here. So if you want to see us, we are going to be at the Texas Star Party Eclipse event. That will be over the few days leading up to the solar eclipse on April 8th. And then, of course, on April 8th, we will be there at the Texas Star Party's solar eclipse event. That's where Skywatcher will be. We'll be showing off some of our gear, and you can come see our team and all that fun stuff. So that's where we will be. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on at Skywatcher, you can head over to skywatcherusa.com and hit subscribe and save up at the top. That puts you in our email list. We send emails all the time showing us or showing you what the webcast episode is going to be for the month, if we have any sales going on, and of course our monthly e-blast, which shows you all the cool stuff that's going on this month for Skywatcher. So hopefully that is helpful for you. All right, let's talk about understanding a total eclipse. Now, oh yes, I'm sorry. It is Skywatcher's 25th anniversary as well. If you're looking for something cool for the 25th anniversary, head over to skywatcherusa.com. We have the limited edition silver anniversary Virtuoso GTIs. They are on sale now. Several, you can check with your favorite dealer as well if they have them in stock. There's only 1,000 of these being made. We do have them available through our website. You can just go over to the skywatcherusa.com and hit add to cart, and you can buy one there. There's mine back in the corner there. Oh, wrong side. There it is. There's number 3 right there. So yeah, Virtuoso GTI. You can see this at the coming Eclipse event and of course at NEAF. We will also have these on display as well. So stop by and check it out. All right, so before we talk about picking an optical tube, we should probably understand what we're talking about. So first, we're talking about understanding a total solar eclipse. Now, most solar eclipses, like an annular or a partial eclipse, which much of the country, much of North America will see this as a partial eclipse unless you are on that thin path of totality, which is only like 100 and something miles across. It's pretty thin. Unless you're on that path, you're going to see a partial eclipse. And for a lot of the country, it's going to be a pretty deep partial eclipse. But nonetheless, you are going to need filters. So make sure you have your filters on hand. If you do not have your equipment by now, good luck. A lot of the companies right now are just rushing to fill orders that have already been placed. So if you're just putting your name on the list to get something, there's a high chance you are not going to see it in time for the eclipse. So if you don't have it by now, there's a good chance you won't have it by the eclipse. Sorry, but you should have known it was coming, and we've been promoting that as well. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Before we can pick an optic, we need to kind of understand what we're doing. So understanding a solar eclipse. Totality is not about the disk of the sun. It's not even about the moon. What you're really traveling to see is the corona. When the sun's disk is completely blackened by the moon, it gives you the very limited chance on seeing the outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona. And that is what it's all about, as well as the very ethereal experience of everything going on around you, from temperature drops to this 360-degree sunset effect, to birds and animals, going back to their homes because they're thinking it's dark. All of that is part of this experience that you will see during totality. It's a whole thing. But from a celestial perspective, we're not there to see the sun. We are there to see the sun disappear and see the atmosphere of the sun, or the corona. So seeing the corona is the goal. Now, you need to take that into consideration. Now, if we're talking about an annular or a partial eclipse, we don't get to see the corona during those events. So we don't even have to consider that. We're all about the solar disk. Now, and that's not a terribly difficult thing to do. The solar disk is only 0.5 degrees in size, in angular resolution. So you can basically fit that in any type of telescope you want. But when we're talking a total solar eclipse, we don't really focus on the disk itself. We need to consider the corona. So you do not want an optic that's going to just zoom you in and have the disk take up the whole field of view. That's not what you're looking for. And that's what this whole topic is going to be about. So if you have a telescope that will only show you about a degree or less, you're kind of missing the point here. What you want to pay attention to is the corona, and the corona is roughly about 3 degrees in size. That's pretty big, and there's a good chance it's even larger than that, especially now because we are approaching maximum. Solar maximum is next year in 2025. So there's a good chance the corona could be fairly active, which means it extends much further out from the disk of the sun. So 3 degrees is probably what I would say is about what you want to aim for. But if you can go a little wider, that is what ideally is what you're going to be looking for. Now, you want to be careful because if the field of view is too large, you're going to lose the resolution. And the corona is this very delicate wisps of material coming off the sun, as you can see in this picture right here. And this one was just a stock image. There's images that are much better out there, but you can see all these very delicate magnetic lines that are going off of the sun. That needs resolution. And if you have too short of a focal length where you get a big chunk of the sky, that's really cool that you can frame all of it. But if you've got too wide of a field of view, you don't get all that fine detail. You just get the larger structures. And if that's what you're going after, that's totally fine. But there's a happy balance between having enough resolution and still filling the frame that you're trying to get all of that. That is what we're looking for today. What's too wide and what's too much. And obviously that's going to be dictated by also the size of the camera sensor. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to all the equipment that you've got to play with and figuring out what's going to meet the window that you're trying to get. And again, too small of a field of view, and you're going to crop out the corona. And that's what you don't want. And that's what I was saying earlier. When we're doing any other type of eclipse, even lunar eclipses, you're really just focusing on the disk of that object, whether it's the moon, and this time it's the sun, an annular or a partial eclipse. You're really just watching the moon glide in front of the disk of the sun, and that's all you care about is that little half-degree circle. That's it. You can't see anything else, so it's not really a big deal. Here, you're looking for the extensions coming off of that, so you need to make sure you're not cropped in too tight, because then you're not going to get all the nice, delicate detail that's extending far off the disk of the sun. So we need to figure out where the balance point is, and then pick an optic that fits within that criteria. Now, this is where considering your optics is going to be a big deal, because there are some things that we need to take into consideration when we're choosing an optic for a total solar eclipse. The big one, because the majority of us are probably driving, flying. I know a large majority of my friends are traveling for this, myself included. It's not something that I'm really in. I mean, I could drive, I guess, but I won't be driving this time. So I need to take that into consideration. I have other friends that are driving, and even if you're driving, you need to take into consideration of what's going to fit. Unless it's going over your backyard, lucky you, and all your stuff is there, and you can do whatever you want, awesome. But the majority of us are traveling. I know people are flying in from other countries. You have to consider all of that. And when we had Gordon on 2 weeks ago for Solar Eclipse Timer, he went into some of that as well, where he's basically talking about how you need to consider keeping your footprint kind of small when you're traveling, especially if you're traveling international. So portability is a big thing. Number one is the traveling with equipment takes consideration. If you're flying, it becomes an even bigger pain, especially when you're flying with either very delicate filters or very expensive equipment. Anything that is very high dollar, I would highly recommend taking with you as your personal or check-on item. However, as we all know, if you've ever flown, that limits your size quite a bit. So you need to pay attention to what you're bringing, and if that's going to work with the method of transportation that you have chosen. Also, is it going to fit? If you're flying, a lot of this stuff, you're either bringing a telescope or a camera lens, and you're going to need some kind of mount and a tripod. Maybe you've got a tracking mount with you, cameras, you've got filters. So any super high dollar equipment, I would try your best to have that with you at all times so it doesn't get lost. My camera disappeared. There we go. Boop, and I'm back. You want to consider that when you're packing your equipment. If you're driving, it's not as big of a deal. You just need to have what fits in the car. I am really bad at that. Whenever I go to star parties, I pack all the equipment that I could ever want, and I don't think about anything else other than that, like food and water and clothes and stuff to sleep. Anything that keeps you comfortable, something that you need to consider when you're going out to this event as well. So make sure when you're packing that you're packing enough to support not just your equipment, but also everything else that you need to bring. And is that going to fit with the method of travel that you have chosen? Probably should have put this bullet point a little bit further up. But how are you getting there? Are you driving? Are you flying? Are you walking? Are you just going outside? We kind of covered this already, but how are you getting there is going to be a big decider of how much and what you can bring. Again, how much space do you have? If you're flying, you're probably very limited on space. If you're driving, you've got more space to work with. You could always go rent a larger vehicle if you really wanted to, so you don't have to rack up all the miles onto your vehicle. But yeah, how much space do you have to work with? Now, this is a big one, particularly in this conversation. Bigger is not always better. Unlike it when you go to a star party, you're going to probably someplace dark. You want to collect all the light that you can so you can get good images and you get a good view of whatever that distant object is. That all needs to be put into consideration. Here, we have way too much light to work with for the most part. I mean, we're using filters to stop a lot of this down. So you don't need these large telescopes anymore. And even during like a total or right there on the left, that was one of my setups for the eclipse in last October, but it was a partial eclipse for where I was at. We didn't see the corona, and even then we didn't see the ring of fire at this point because of our position. But either way, all we were focused on was just the disk of the sun. So as long as it fit in the field of view, it didn't matter otherwise. But we're not thinking about that nowadays. We're thinking about how we're going to fit the corona into the field of view. That's going to be our big thing here. So using a big 6-inch refractor isn't going to make a lot of sense anymore. I probably need to go smaller for this event. Now, another big thing is simplicity. Let's see. Did you image through the... I can't see. This little heart thing they put up is really obnoxious. I'm not sure what's going on with the audio. We're actually going to dig into that and fix that next week, hopefully. I need to see what's going on. Let me go full frame here. There we go. Next week, we should have this fixed up. I'm not sure what's going on with it. I've been messing with it all week and just have not been able to figure out what the delay is going on with this stuff. So sorry about that, but we'll get that fixed up. Sorry, let's see. Where were you? Did you image through the quantum or use it for visual? The quantum solar filter, it's a Daystar filter you can see on the middle telescope of this setup right here. Let me see this thing right here. This is a quantum hydrogen alpha solar filter I've got from Daystar. So on that, we are just doing visual. So at this point, I did not do any imaging in hydrogen alpha of the annular eclipse. I just did viewing here. I did shoot, you can see the camera there on the third telescope on the right there. That's an EvoStar 80. And I just put my Canon EOS R and I put a white light filter up there and it worked just fine. But I use the quantum just for visual. So quick question. In Stellarium, we can see the corona when applying date and position settings for the eclipse. How much reliable is that corona image and size for framing assistance? That's a good question. I did not know that they were doing that. That's cool that they do that. But I'm not sure at that point. The corona, you're probably looking at about 3 degrees, if not a little bit larger. Now, no one's going to know what the corona is actually doing until the day of the eclipse, because the corona is changing every day. So you're not really going to know exactly how far it's stretching out from the sun until we get everything else up and running and we go into totality. So you kind of have to just plan accordingly for it and move on from there. So what you see in Stellarium is probably helpful to assist, but it's not going to be dead on for what totality is going to be. There's just not a really good way to show what you're expecting. So anyway, when you're trying to pick your solar setup, particularly for an annual or a total solar eclipse, because a total solar eclipse, and this one, you've got 4.5 minutes max. If you're dead center on the center line, it's about 4.5 minutes. That's all the time that you've got to see everything. And if you're trying to get details like Bailey's beads and the diamond ring, you have seconds to do that right. So a lot of these people who have done these multiple eclipses, they are aware of what needs to be done. If you've never done this before, you can go back and watch Gordon's episode from 2 weeks ago. He kind of goes into the detail and timing and stuff, and his app will help you with the timing of when to do that. But don't get too complicated, because if it gets too complicated, you're going to lose out. And that's not something that you want to happen, because the next time you get this, you're either paying a ton of money to travel some distant place, or you're going to be waiting 20 years roughly until the next one comes around. So I would highly recommend work with what you know. If you've got a system that's already sitting around that kind of meets the specifications for what we're going to need, just use that. We're getting very close now to the point where if you're getting something new, you're going to need some time to flush out all the bugs. I've got a new scope out in the back right now. After we're done here, I'll probably go back to messing with it. I'm trying to kind of learn its ins and outs because it's new to me. So I've got gear right now. I'm trying to kind of finesse to get to where I need it to be. But now's the time that you need to start taking your equipment setup seriously and really start flushing out all the details and how it's going to get there and what it's going to need. But work with what you know. Don't get too crazy on it. You don't want to get fancy at this point. If you're doing automation, good for you. I'm hoping that works out for you. It can be very helpful with automation, but it all comes down to timing with this stuff. And you want to make sure that your timing is on. So when you're shooting totality, you've got a few minutes to really mess with what you want to do. But if you're going after certain details like Bailey's beads and the diamond ring, you only have seconds to do that. So I would not recommend getting too crazy at this point. But if you are going to get something new or you're trying something new, make sure you flush this out constantly. Over the next couple weeks, try over and over and over and over again and make sure you're aware of if your mount has to do the meridian flip. And if you need to do a meridian flip, how the time's going to work. Plan all of that out. As your telescope have enough clearance? Can you balance? Do you have all the weights that you need to do it if you're going to be using an equatorial mount? All of that are things that you need to consider. And another big one is consider all your adapters, all those spacers. I like to use field flatteners. I want the field to be as flat as possible with very little distortion. So make sure all your back focus is figured out. Everything needs to be there because it only takes one adapter to screw up everything where you can't come to focus. So make sure you've got your whole imaging train figured out. I will be spending a good chunk of next week personally kind of flushing out my own stuff because we got to get it ready for the Texas event. We're showing stuff off. So yes, astronomy.tools is an excellent resource if you're framing. We'll actually be talking about that here in a little bit. And look at that, framing. Man, you guys know what I'm talking about. So framing, this is really what the episode's all about. We're trying to frame up the corona. That's what we're trying to do here. So obviously there's a lot of different sensors on the market, especially if we're talking about dedicated cameras, you know, like 533s, 571s, 455s, you know, there's all the 294s. There's all kinds of sensors out there that you could choose. Most people, I would probably recommend just using a mirrorless or a DSLR camera, especially because they have the bracketing capability. It's really nice. So I would definitely try to make sure you've got all that figured out. But choose the camera. The camera is what's going to ultimately dictate your field of view. You can always change the optic to match up to the camera sensor size, but there's when we're talking about just digital cameras and we're getting rid of the dedicated cameras, there's really just 3 sensors. Micro Four Thirds, which is basically Olympus cameras at this point, but there's other ones out there. But I just threw it in there for the sake of argument. APS-C, that's probably the most common sensor on the market. And then, of course, you've got full frame. Now, these are the 3 major sensors that you're going to be working with. And these are ultimately what will dictate your framing. Now, you can always switch out the optics, whether it's a camera lens, like a zoom lens, or a prime lens, or a telescope. You can always switch the optic out to make a better fit for your framing. But you really need to pick the camera that you're going to be using. That will be your foundation, and everything is built upon the camera sensor size. The goal here is you're looking for something that's probably 3 to 6 degrees field of view in landscape mode. So the long portion of your sensor, the x-axis of your sensor, I would probably recommend you go between 3 and 6 degrees in order to make sure you've got enough room to catch the corona in all of its glory. And you want to make sure your telescope or your lens gives that to you, because if you're too short, again, you're not going to get enough detail. And if you're too long, you're going to crop it. So pick what you want to do. So let's talk about focal lengths. Let's see, I have a 180 to 600 lens. Would a 2x teleconverter be too much? I'm going to put it on the GTI and Solar Quest mount. We're actually about to talk about that exact topic here, so stay tuned really quickly and we'll go over it. So ideal focal lengths, I'm going to break that up right now. So again, this is all going to come down. Number one is, what sensor are you using? So for this slide, we're talking about Micro Four Thirds, which at this point is mostly Olympus. There's probably some other cameras out there. If you're using a dedicated astronomy camera, this is basically a 294 sensor. So you can see right here, and all these graphs right here are from astronomy.tools. It's a fantastic website. I've actually got it up right here. Here's the website. And you can change it from visual to binocular to imaging mode. I have it switched to imaging mode. Go to the drop down in the middle, hit sun, and then come over here and pick whatever your camera is going to be, and then start just plugging away your field of view. But for a for a Micro Four Thirds, we want to make sure I would probably say try to get at least 3 degrees, if not a little bit more, for anything that you're aiming for, because that extra wiggle room is going to be really nice. So right here, because Micro Four Thirds is smaller than a crop sensor, I just gave 4 examples using various focal lengths. So if you're using Micro Four Thirds, you can see a 600 millimeter is going to give you about 1.6 degrees by 1.2 degrees. That would work, but you're going to probably end up cropping some of your corona out, and that's not great. So I would honestly, if you're trying to shoot a Micro Four Thirds sensor, probably try to get yourself into that 200 to 300 millimeter focal length for your lens. And that's going to frame you up pretty nice. You can see right there at 250 millimeters, you're at 3.95 by 3. Is that right? That's what it calculated earlier, but hold on. Let's just do this together. We're just going to pick an Olympus camera. We're going to pick 250 millimeters up there. There's supposed to be a 2. This was supposed to be a 2. So you can see right here, it calculates it right there. We'll just add field of view. There it is right there. So that's the correct one. That's what the yellow, that's the same field. We cannot see what you're speaking about. Well, I'm talking about this right here. Here's my typo right here. This is supposed to be a 2. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you guys can see that, because this is what I'm talking. Here's the field of view indicators right here. The yellow box, this should be a 2 right here. Sorry about that. But then I brought this back up here. There we go. So here's what that should look like. And when that's all plugged in, it's 3.95 by 2.96 degrees. That's what this should be, 2.96 degrees. So if you're shooting a micro four thirds, I would probably recommend, from looking at the simulators here, that you shoot between 200 and 300 millimeter focal length. You could probably push up into the 350, but once you start to get to about 400, you might have an issue with cropping some of the corona out. So if you're shooting micro four thirds, ideal focal lengths would probably be between 200 and 300 millimeter on a micro four thirds sensor. So that could either be a camera lens, it could be a very short telescope at this point, but that's all you're going to need for that small of a sensor. Now, obviously, I'm just picking the three most popular sensors for like standard cameras. Now, if you're going to start using something like a 533, like a dedicated camera, you're going to have to start messing with this calculator. So let me clear these out, because a 533 is a very popular sensor. Let me just find a 533 based camera in here. Boop, 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 boop. I'll just use ZWO because they're easy to find, and I don't know the names of all the other ones. I think I skipped it somewhere. There it is, 533. There's the sun. So here's a 533 on a 250 millimeter focal length. You're at I'll just say 2.6 degree field by 2.6 degree field. That would be okay, but I would probably want to go down to, if you're shooting a 533, looking at the math on the simulator, I would use a 200 millimeter focal length optic, maybe a little shorter than that. So if you're shooting 533 cameras, or a camera that's based on a 533 sensor, the simulator is showing 3.24 degrees square, because it's a square sensor. I would look at about 200 millimeters. That would be my recommendation for a 533. For micro four thirds, like a 294 or an Olympus cameras, I would probably look between 200 and 300 millimeter focal lengths. Now, moving on, let's talk about APS-C. Now, APS-C sensors are probably the most popular. They're in all the Canon Rebels. They're in all the Fuji cameras. Nikon has stuff. I'm sure Sony does. I'm just not as familiar. And then, of course, if we're talking a dedicated camera, it'd be a 571. So that's like a ZWO 2600 or an equivalent to that. But a APS-C is one of the most available sensors on the market. So that's a little bit different, because now this is a larger sensor than a 4/3, and a much larger sensor than a 533. So if we take all of this into consideration, now we can go with a little bit longer focal length. You can see right here that 700 millimeters is getting a little bit tight. It's about 2 degrees by 1.37 degrees. That's a little too tight. You could do some nice work with that, and I'm sure you'd get really nice detail inside the corona, but if it's really extending off the disk of the sun quite a bit, you're probably going to lose some of those faint tendrils that are coming way off the solar disk. So 700 millimeters is going to be a bit much. Even 600 millimeters, you're getting a little tight. If you're shooting crop sensors, I'd probably use about a 500 millimeter focal length. Now, the picture that I've been showing here, let me just go back. This picture on the left here, this is my shot of totality. This was using a Canon 7D Mark II, which is actually the camera I am broadcasting on right now, which will probably come along. And this is with an Esprit 100 at f5.5. So this is 550 millimeter focal length. You can see how that frames up pretty nicely. I probably would have rotated it, knowing a little bit more, just to angle it, because you can see right here, it's kind of going off this way and this way. So I wish I would have angled it probably about another 40 degrees or so in rotation, just to frame that up a bit better. But this was in 2017, the first time I've ever done it. and I'm just glad I got something cool out of it. So yeah, so that gives you an idea of what a crop sensor looks like. This year I'll be shooting full frame on a 100, which will be a lot better. But crop sensors are something that you're really going to want a shorter focal length than longer. So you can see here from the simulator from astronomy.tools, 500 millimeter is probably where you want to be. You could actually go to 400 millimeter and probably be a little bit better framed to give yourself some wiggle room. And this is where if you have these zoom lenses, like our friend Raw Alerts in the chat he has got a 180 to 600. Now there's a lot of these camera lenses out nowadays, like 150 to 600s, 200 600s, and a lot of these super zoom lenses that are out on the market right now from all the major manufacturers. That is a really good lens to have, whether it's like a Canon 100 to 400. I know Canon's got the 100 500. Sony's got a 200 600. Tamron and Sigma both have the 150 to 600s. Those lenses are ideal for shooting eclipses because you have the reach with it. But if you're shooting APS-C and you have one of these lenses and you're shooting on this crop sensor, I'd probably set this to right around 500, maybe 400, between 400 and 500 millimeter is what I would aim for. You could go to 600 all the way, but you'll probably crop it. So bring that zoom about midway to about 400 or 500. I'd probably actually suggest closer to 400 millimeters, and you'll be pretty good. And that's on a crop sensor. So again, if you're shooting on a crop sensor camera, I would probably try to target about 400 millimeter focal length, whether that's a telescope or a camera lens. I would try to shoot somewhere around there. Really quick before we get to full frame, because we actually have some time, let's talk about the optics of what we're using. Now, there's a lot of telescopes on the market, and there's a lot of lenses on the market right now. Now, there's stuff with mirrors in it. There's stuff with lenses in it. I highly recommend using a refractor for an eclipse. I would avoid using anything with mirrors in it. Mirrors are great for deep sky targets, but when you have as much light as we're talking now, you can get some really weird reflections that bounce around inside of a mirror system. So I would highly recommend, if you're doing this seriously and want the best shots and the cleanest shots, using a camera lens or a refractor. Just stick with a lens. It'll reduce a lot of weird aberrations that you'll probably get during your imaging sequences. Now, another thing is, obviously you could go out and get a cheap achromatic telescope, but I would highly recommend that you are using a higher quality apochromatic system. So a camera lens that uses ED glass, or even a refractor that uses ED glass. We are shooting in broadband light. A white light filter lets all the colors through, so you're not isolating one particular color. So I would highly recommend using some kind of apochromatic, whether it's an ED doublet, an ED triplet. It really just has to have a little bit of color correction on it just to give you the best color correction. So in our lineup for Skywatcher, the telescopes I would highly recommend, and these are all in stock, so if you're looking for something last minute, I would highly recommend our EvoStar 72 and 80 are probably the two most ideal in our doublet line. And if you can get the reducer flattener for them, that's even better, because it's going to give you a corrected field, and it'll make it flat. So for Skywatcher equipment, I would recommend, again, our EvoStar 72 or 80 if you're on the doublet side. And those have very high quality lenses in them, so the color will be dead on. Now, if you want to go even higher, we do have the Esprit triplet line. I would recommend, the advantage of some of the larger Esprits, like the 100 and the 120, is they are full frame capable. But the 80 is a great telescope for a crop sensor, because it has that It comes with the flattener. It comes with all the adapters to make your camera work. You might just need to get the appropriate M48 T-ring for whatever it is. Ours comes with a Canon EF ring, but you might want to go a little bit further with some of your other setups. Like if you're using a mirrorless camera, you need to make sure that you know the back focus and use the right adapters there. But yeah, the Esprit 80 would be great. I favor the Esprit 100 because it has full frame capability. The Esprit 120 would be okay, and the 150 is getting a little tight unless you're reducing it. Let's see. I know there's a couple questions in here. Is that 400 millimeter in full frame terms or taking into account the 1.x crop factor? We haven't talked about full frame yet. So 400 millimeters would be crop with a crop sensor. I don't do the crop factor because in astronomy, we don't really pay attention to the crop factor. It's actually one of my more bigger pet peeves when we're talking about photography is a lens is whatever the focal length is, period. If it's a 400 millimeter lens, it's 400 millimeters, whether it has a tiny sensor or a big sensor. If you're just trying to calculate the framing to give you a better idea of what it's like, then you can do about that. But yeah, 400 millimeter for a crop sensor. You don't take in the crop magnification. Can you use a Herschel wedge to watch an eclipse? Sure you can. I actually favor Herschel wedges for white light. I think they have the cleanest white light image possible. However, I would not use a Herschel wedge if you're going to be in totality and the goal is to view the corona. The reason I don't like using a Herschel wedge, this is the only time I don't like using a Herschel wedge for white light, is because if you are going to take pictures of the corona, you need to make sure you are focused and ready to go. Because when Bailey's beads and the diamond ring effect starts, you need to be in focus and ready to rock and roll right then and there. So if you use a Herschel wedge, you will not be able to see those events, especially with your camera. If you're doing visual, then fine, go ahead and use a Herschel wedge and just look up at that point. But a Herschel wedge is something I would not recommend using for a total solar eclipse. For a partial eclipse or annular, all the way. Herschel wedges are my favorite. But you have to make sure you are using them correctly. And you have to make sure it's on a refractor 6 inches or smaller in aperture, 150 millimeter or smaller. So yeah, that's what I would not use a Herschel wedge for a total solar eclipse. I get my front mounted filter, usually glass or film, put that up front, get focused, and I just let that camera, the telescope that's going to be doing pictures, just sit there. And then when we get close to totality, I'm using the Solar Eclipse Timer app. It tells me when to take it off, take the filter off, pound away for 4.5 minutes with pictures, get Bailey's beads, diamond ring, all the way through totality, all the way through diamond ring and Bailey's beads on the other side, and then filter goes back on. But the front mounted filter allows you to get focused and ready to go, so I don't have to touch it again. And then I'm ready to go for totality. With a Herschel wedge, I would have to take the wedge off, put the filter back on, put a front filter on, get focused again, do all that, and then at the end, flip it all back around. I don't want to deal with that. So that's my perspective on it. But any other time, or if you're even thinking about just observing the sun with a nice refractor, Herschel wedges. You got to look into a Herschel wedge. But yeah, we are doing a Q&A section on all the random questions for the sun in 2 weeks. So if you have more questions, we can even talk about this one again. That is what you're going to want to ask us on that Q&A session. I would highly recommend holding those kind of questions. But yeah. All right, let's dig a little deeper. Full frame. The big chips are now in play. Full frame. This will be my first time shooting an eclipse with full frame in totality. So full frame is going to give you a lot of room to work with. Now, full frame cameras, when I chuck this through the simulator, this is what I kind of came out with as the ideal stuff. Now, originally, I was actually planning to shoot this eclipse with an Esprit 150 with a reducer. That puts me about 800 millimeters. That's not terrible, but it's not ideal. I've actually changed that now. I'm going to go back to my Esprit 100 because I know it is bulletproof and I know it works. But I'm going to be using my Canon EOS R. That's a full frame at 550 millimeters. So I'm going to be right about 4 degrees by 2 3/4 of a degree, roughly right in there. That's perfect. 600 millimeter full frame. Awesome. So if you have one of those 150 to 600 lenses and it's a full frame camera, 600 is probably pretty good. After 600, I know there's some questions about using teleconverters. I would never bother with a teleconverter for an eclipse. It's too much focal length and you really don't need it. Unless you have like a prime 200 millimeter lens and you need more reach, then don't worry about it. But anything else, especially full frame, don't even bother with a teleconverter. Number one, it's too much focal length. Number two, they degrade the image. There's some questions in here. I have an Evo Guide 50 ED with a 294 and a stars on a flattener. That would be frame up the eclipse well. What I don't understand is how to pick an exposure when using an astro camera. Any ideas? So that's exactly why I have this website up. So this right here, MrEclipse.com. Mr. Eclipse is Fred Espinek, who is probably one of the best solar eclipse observers in the world. He will actually be our special guest on the end of the month, like a week before the total eclipse happens. Fred is going to be on, and he can go into all of that. Now, this is how I started to learn a little bit about the eclipse exposures for 2017. Now, the nice thing about a telescope is that the focal ratio is going to stay put. And actually, even in your camera lens, you don't want to mess around with your focal ratio. Just leave it. The aperture, don't touch it. It's one less thing to mess around with. You don't want to be messing with stuff. So the Evo Guide is about 4.8-ish. And a 294. So that, let's go back to astronomy.tools really quick. Evo guides are 250 millimeters. You're using a 294. There it is. Out of the field of view. Let's get rid of these. That is your field of view right there. That's 4.4 by 3 degrees. Actually, an Evo Guide 50 with a 294 or a 4/3 sensor is an awesome little solar eclipse setup. And the nice thing about that is it's super small, it's sharp, and it checks all the boxes. So if I haven't done this until this point. So where is it? Peter in the chat is using one of our Evo guides. Looking at this is pretty ideal if you have a 294. You're doing 4.4 degree by about, well, let's round up 3 degrees. You've got a lot of room to work with. And the nice thing about it is it's tiny. We might need to do this setup. And it's a little one. You can just get a tiny little filter for it. I might have to try this setup. Even if let's actually back up a little bit. Let's say you're going to be using a 533 camera, which is even smaller. And I know there's one in here somewhere. There's way too many sensors nowadays. Here we go. Even that would be okay. And I like that this is a square sensor as well. I would still pick the 294. But the 533 would match up really well with a Evo Guide 50. So anyway, let's continue on. Let me just make sure I've got all the information down really quick. Evo stars. Here's the Evo Guide. Oh, look, they're in stock. F4.8 is what that is. Oh, wait, they're 242. So it's a little bit wider than what we've got here. 242. And this is the nice thing about the modern era is you've got a lot of room to work with. Let's get a little purple one. So you're at 4.5 degrees by 3 degree field of view. That's pretty sweet. I might have to figure out how to add one of these little 50s into the rig. because that's not a bad setup right there. Okay, so we're at f4.8. Now we can go to Fred's website, mreclipse.com. If you want to know about focal length, all of this, I learned everything I've gotten here from Fred's website. So if you want to know more, Fred's the website. You can see here's all the focal length comparisons. You can see how we're cropping the corona on these two. Blue is crop. Black is full frame. So you can see 2,000 millimeters, way too much. 15, way too much. 1,000, you're getting better. 500, there you go. So something to think about. But he goes into it somewhere right down here. This is your solar exposure guide. And you can see everything is broken down. Bailey's beads, chromosphere, prominence, corona in the different stages, and the shutter speeds. All of this can be documented there, and he has ways to calculate that as well, because obviously with this, it's f4.8. So there's going to be a little bit of math that you got to put on for yourself here. But if you want to know, here's all of it right here. And this is where it's really nice to be using a camera that can bracket. A lot of the DSLRs and mirrorless cameras can bracket. So if you can't get the exposure on, bracketing allows your camera to shift exposure times in a burst. So you can tell it to take a picture, and then it goes and every time it takes a picture, it's adjusting to either brighter or longer or shorter in that exposure time. So bracketing is really a big key, and one of the major advantages of using a like a mirrorless camera or something like that. But if you want to know about exposures, I would go over to mreclipse.com and look through his exposure speeds and figure out the formula here. So the exposure time. So right here basically is what you want to know. So F is going to be the exposure or your focal ratio. So in this case on an Evo, it's a 4.8 squared divided by everything in here. So you may have to go in and actually do some math, but we've got time, and this is where it's good to go in and kind of calculate stuff and mess with it. And that makes it a lot easier. But you can customize your whole setup right here. It just takes a calculator and a little bit of time. So, but yeah, looking at the field of view indicators with the 294 sensor and an Evo Guide 50, your field of view is perfect. Now you just need to get the exposure down, and you can calculate that all with this formula over here. I'm sure there's a calculator somewhere that someone's made, but hopefully that helps. We are at the end of our presentation for today. That's pretty much it for shooting eclipses. So boiling it all down, if you're shooting a crop, if you're shooting micro four thirds, I'd probably pick something between 200 and 400 millimeters. If you're shooting APS-C, I would probably shoot between 400 and 300 to 500 millimeter ideally. If we're doing full frame, I would shoot between 400 to 600 millimeters. Probably focusing around 500 millimeters would be that. And get something that is apochromatic, an ED doublet, an ED triplet. You could use a quad. It doesn't matter. But make sure it's well corrected. It's got good color correction. If it's flat field or has a corrector to flatten the field, that's even better. But that's basically what we're looking for. And then make sure it has the ability to illuminate whatever size sensor that you're working with. So let me see. There's some questions floating around here. Did that one. Kevin, what is the captain's wheel thing on your apo refractors? Oh, on the Esprits, we have a captain's wheel. It's a rotator on the back of it. It helps rotate the focuser. That's basically what they are. With Thousand Oaks, full aperture, 95 millimeter fit on my 180 to 600 lens because I have a few screw-on filters from Thousand Oaks, but I heard those are a pain to deal with. I'm not sure. So basically in that question, you need to go measure the front diameter of your lens. Either with the lens shade on or with it off. Doesn't matter. Just measure wherever you want to mount the filter. Just measure it. and then you'll need to go fit it. There are filters for everything out there. I would not mess with a thread-on filter for a total eclipse. I have thread-on filters. They are really nice filters. They work fine, but you need to be on your game if you're going to be shooting Bailey's beads and the diamond ring. So the thread-on filters, while secure and work well, they're going to be a pain when it comes down to those split-second changes that you need to be doing. I would not bother with a thread-on filter. So measure the front of your lens and either go get one of the little Daystar fold-up cardboard filters that just pop over the front, or get some Mylar film on order and just make your own, or worst case scenario, just put a rubber band around it and wrap it around. That's actually not a great idea because you're going to have to take that off. Just go find yourself a filter that pops on the front. Cardboard filter from Daystar is great, or find yourself a filter, but you are running out of major time right now. So I would avoid thread-on filters for a total eclipse if you're going to be in totality. Let's see. If I'm in Arizona, I want to drive to Texas for the eclipse. Where the heck should I go if I have no plans as of yet? Oh boy. If you don't have plans set up by now, you're really risking it at this point. Let's see. 2024 eclipse path. Where is it? Time and date, 2024 eclipse. Okay, here we go. I like using timeanddate.com. Just Google time and date 2024 eclipse. What I like is it has this detailed eclipse map. Here's the path of totality. You have to be on this very dark section to be in totality. If you are anywhere outside this dark section, you will not get totality. And please don't be that person that's like, I went and I got 99%. No, that's worse than just missing it completely, because you made the effort to get pretty much there and you probably could have driven just a couple miles more and been in totality. The magnetic adapters for threading on a filter, that's a good idea. So that makes it faster. So the dotted line right here is the center line that's dead on. Everything within the red spot is your path of totality, that dark red, and everything outside of that is partial eclipse. So if you're driving to Texas from Arizona, you need to be in this path. You could go to Dallas, Waco, Austin. There's a bunch of little towns in there as well. There's a good chance you're going to be sleeping in your car at this point, because if you don't have rooms available, good luck. Because number one, whatever is available is probably going to cost a fortune. And yeah, it's just going to get crazy. So you can try to do it, but if you need to pick a spot, you want to look in probably Texas somewhere. The closer to Mexico you get, the better. I think the weather prospects are better the further south you can go. But yeah, there is your path right there. So literally anything in that path, if you want to be on the dead center, you need to go anywhere that's right on that dotted line. So yeah. So how long deleted. Never mind. Yeah, the rates are going to be crazy. So if you're driving, you got to hit somewhere in this path. The more in the center you are, the more time you're going to get. And the nice thing about this is if you go here, you can actually just click. Boop. If you click, it gives you literally all the start and end times, and it tells you the maximum duration of totality right there. 4 minutes, 23 seconds for this little location outside of Dallas. But you can see and plan accordingly from there. Oh, there's still room at the Texas Star Party event. It is a little pricey, but it's probably the best deal because it's 4 days. It's a dark sky, somewhat dark sky. Food's included. The rates are, everything's going to be inflated, but we looked a lot for the Skywatcher team to go somewhere. and the Texas Star Party event's probably the best deal you're going to get. So food's included. It's 4 days. They have speakers. They have vendors that will be there. We'll be there. I think astrophysics is going to be there. I'm not sure who else exactly at this point, but there'll be other vendors there. It's a Star Party too, so it's a fun event to be at. So if you're looking for a place to go, the Texas Star Party event, apparently there's room. I would look there. But if you're going to be driving anywhere else, just go to timeanddate.com, zoom in on the map, find a location. The closer you are to the dotted line, the better. And then if you want to know, just click anywhere there on that map. So yeah. All right, everyone, that's pretty much it for this week. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, as well as the whole Skywatcher team. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on the video. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Choosing OTAs for a solar eclipse. You just go back and figure out whatever the focal length is and find something in that category that fits your camera sensor. But the camera sensor is going to be the dictator of what's gonna frame you up. Next week, where our buddy Simon Tang is back, and he's gonna be talking about eclipses and shooting stuff. He's done this before, so he will be on with us next week to talk about all that. If you're looking for something to do this weekend, it is the Messier Marathon here in Arizona. The All Arizona Messier Marathon starts tonight. It's outside of Quartzsite, not far from Quartzsite, from the California border. So yeah, there's that. If you've got nothing to do tomorrow, I will be at the Arizona Science Center from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. We're doing a talk for people in astronomy, showing kids what kind of careers you can have in space and astronomy. But we're doing solar viewing outside of the Arizona Science Center downtown. We'll have a few hydrogen alpha telescopes, some meteorites, some white light, maybe a calcium too. We'll see. But if you've got nothing to do tomorrow, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. downtown Arizona Science Center, I'll be there with my team in Focus Astronomy, and we'll be doing stuff there as well. And you can talk to me in person about eclipses there. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day. It's a new moon weekend. Get out there, do some cool stuff. The sun's rocking too. Have a great time. Have a good weekend, and we will see you guys next Friday, hopefully with a better synced audio. So thank you very much. Take care. Clear skies, and bye.